They called it crazy because the men who fly straight into gunfire have a healthy suspicion of cleverness. The tail gunner in question, a kid from Indiana with hands that never stopped looking for something to adjust, held up a scrap of plexiglass like it was a compass and said he could make the sight picture stop shivering. Not the airplane. Nobody could quiet a fortress in rough air. But the picture. He had 2 small mirrors scrounged from a busted shaving kit and a crashed trainer, an N8 sight that fluttered in the slipstream like a candle, and a problem that had followed him from gunnery school to the ETO. When the tail shuddered and the pilot skidded or banked, the tracers walked like drunks, and the lead that made sense on the range turned to superstition. He wanted a frame that would not care about vibration. He wanted references that would sit at the edges of his vision like guard rails, so his hands could listen to geometry instead of fear. In the far back of a B-17, the world is angles and wind. The tail cone fills with noise that becomes normal after a few missions, a constant saw that chews up adjectives. You sit on a bicycle seat with twin 50s farther out than your knees, glass in front of your face, a reticle that says it knows where bullets go, and a body that says it doesn't believe any of it when the ship slips right to dodge flak. The gunner's idea lived where those arguments meet. He cut a plexiglass strip into a horseshoe that could clamp around the sight head without blocking it, then epoxied 2 mirrors into the corners, one high left, one low right, angled so their inner edges formed a box around the reticle whenever his eye was in the same place. He scribed hair-thin lines on the mirror edges and scratched tiny tick marks at distances measured in mils. Then he taped the frame to the sight with cotton friction tape that stayed sticky and cold, and wrote in grease pencil on the plexi, "Don't chase, box it." He built the device in a maintenance tent with an armorer pretending not to watch. The first version shook apart on taxi because he had trusted glue more than screws. The second held but brightened the tail with flares of sun that made him swear like a radio gone bad. On the third, he dulled the mirrors with a smoke of lamp black, polishing only the inner millimeter through which he'd read the world. The box needed calibration the way a new watch does. He clamped the frame to the N8 and parked a helper with chalk at the range fence back in Arizona months earlier. This was the memory he carried, measuring wingspans of the tow plane at known ranges, scribing that number onto the mirror's edge. 30 mils equals so many feet, 60 equals the next thing, and so on. He drew lead bars on the plexi like half-transparent ladders. 1 bar for a 300 Nemapurif crossing at 400 yards, 2 bars for 400 at 300, a little hash for the weird obliques that come in when a target is climbing through your high 6. He harmonized his guns, so they walked together to a point 800 feet aft and 2 feet high of center line, a compromise born of training tables and the way Messerschmitts actually arrived in Europe. The range officer had shaken his head, but allowed the tests because the kids' groups tightened on paper, and his ammo reports came back lighter than anyone else's. He could see it in stopwatch time, the interval from first visual to first useful burst. With the mirror frame on, his eye found the same relationship between corners and reticle in less than a second. Without it, the N8's dance cost him 1 second, then 2, then a panic burst that burned 10 rounds to accomplish nothing. On a head-on pass against a towed sleeve, his first 2 short bursts bracketed the same hole instead of writing a dotted line. On a stern chase, he learned to put the target's vertical ahead of aim line in the notch, where the top mirror's etched hairline met the reticle ring. He could reduce an attack to a sentence. Aspect 30, high 6, compress one lead bar into upper left corner, short burst, correct by one tick. His notebook showed the change in handwriting, the way numbers began to relax into habits. He carried that notebook across the Atlantic in a B-24, stuffed with duffels and quiet men whose heads tilted in sleep every time the engines changed pitch. In England, at a hard stand smeared with oil and tea, he asked for 10 minutes on a spare tail. The armorer who'd pretended not to care now cared enough to bring him a vernier caliper and a drill. They bent a bracket from scrap aluminum to replace tape. They marked the mirror edges again in light that had learned to be northern. They parked a jeep at measured distances behind a fortress and talked about what the world looks like at 400 yards when the world is trying to kill you. The radio man stood at 200 with a cloth flag and waved aspect angles, flat, quartering, climbing through the vertical. The engineer crew chief drew a chalk line on concrete and said, "Hold yourself to this eye position, kid. Parallax is a liar when you give it an inch." The crew worked the way crews do when an idea begins to feel like a tool. They owned pieces of it until nobody could say whose it had been. Nobody in formation liked tail gunners who decorated their office. But the first time the mirrors saved time, the co-pilot in their crew asked what the black edges were and why short bursts were actually short. They were halfway to Bremen, with contrails writing their intentions and the sun doing that high, mean winter thing over the right shoulder. A pair of single-engine fighters tested the six like they were measuring for curtains. No rush, a flutter of ailerons. Then gone. The tail gunner talked on interphone the way you talk to yourself when you're trying to be helpful and brave at once. "High 6, 2 single-engine white spinners," he said. The box gave him a framed picture instead of a rumor. He parked the top left hairline on the canopy line, compressed one lead bar, and waited for the silhouette to grow into its own name. The burst when it came was 3 heartbeats, not 6. The tracers fell into the same space twice, sawtooth bright, then darker where they hid in exhaust. The fighter broke a fraction sooner than tail gunners expect, and the co-pilot said, "Well, I'll be," which in that crew meant love. Numbers began to appear in the debrief in places where adjectives had lived. Time to first effective burst, estimated 1.2 seconds shorter. Average rounds per engagement, down by 1/3. Dispersion at 300-500 yards, clusters instead of chains, measured by men at flak towers who were not romantics. The radio man started a little column in the Form 104, showing drift versus day's wind, and the way his tail gunner corrected without crowing about it. The pilot, who had learned the grim art of how to turn a fortress without taking away the tail's field of fire, began to coordinate calls. Left turn in 2, watch your high 6. Right skid, 3 seconds, with the knowledge that his kid in the back had a system that turned seconds into confidence. No mirror can make men immortal, but morale is physics when the thing that scares you becomes a set of lines and not a weather report. The hack needed maintenance discipline. After every mission, the armorer looked down the bores and up the mirror frame. Harmonization creeps in cold and vibration. Mirrors walk when bolts forget who they are. The crew instituted a ritual that felt like superstition and turned out to be craft. Step 1. Wipe the mirror edges with alcohol so the etched marks read clean against sky. Step 2. Check the clamp's 0 by sighting an aiming circle painted on a hanger wall and noting whether the reticle and hairlines married where they had on Tuesday. Step 3. Dry fire check with an empty belt to make sure sight bounce was predictable and the mirror frame didn't add its own resonance. If any of the three felt wrong, the gunner pulled the frame, relined the marks against the aiming circle, and wrote the new offset in his pocket card. Pilots signed off not because group asked them to, but because you can hear accuracy from a tail. Bursts that sound like punctuation instead of panic. Training manuals had not asked for mirrors, but they had asked for discipline. The section on visual control talked about using peripheral cues, a wingtip, a frame bar, a bolt head, to anchor the eye. The mirror system made those cues portable. Parallax, the thing instructors warned about like it had a grudge, became harnessed. If your eye returned to the same place in the glass every time the corners lined up, the apparent frame stopped lying. The gunner scrawled an equation in his notes that wasn't really math so much as church. Hold eye, align edges, box aspect, apply bar, burst. He wrote beneath it, repeat the same mistake exactly, and it stops being a mistake. People laughed. Then their bursts started getting shorter and louder. Gunnery school had taught rule-of-thumb leads that live in the head like multiplication tables. 2 wingspans of lead for a head-on at 300, 1.5 for a quartering, half a wingspan when the bandit is climbing through your line on a 6-high. In combat, those rules fragment under panic, unless something catches them before they scatter. The mirrors gave the rules a place to sit. The top edge carried a faint 2W scratched beside a longer hash. The side edge carried 1.5W and 1W. The tick marks weren't for reading so much as for feeling. Your eye would stick when a silhouette hit the right proportion at the right spot, and your hands would answer with a press that felt like a correct sentence. The group's gunnery officer, a gentle tyrant, asked for proof. They got it on camera gun film when the projectors back at base spit out black and white evidence. Tracers that used to draw parentheses around a fighter now filed short, square bursts that started where the silhouette ought to die. They took the method to weather that made grown men into briefly superstitious boys. Sun low off the right makes mirrors cruel. Glare writes ghosts where hairlines should be. The gunner dulled the mirrors further, left only the inner whisper bright, and cut a thin hood from the corner of a map case to shade the top edge. He put a sliver of red tape at 0, just a dot where his eye should live, and another at the point where the reticle tended to wander when the tail kicked. He taught himself to ignore the red, unless the world got ugly. Then the dot was a lifeline back to the position from which his box made sense. In heavy chop, he learned to pulse the box, a quick alignment breath that returned the corners to square before the next burst. In a corkscrew, when the pilot asked the airplane to survive flak by throwing it around, the box kept the tail gunner's hands from committing the panic sin, hosing the sky out of anger instead of speaking it in commas. Field trials in England proved something else. Twin 50s tell the truth if you harmonize them to the language your sight picture speaks. The squadron's armorers had a standard, converge at a certain range to a point on the center line, but the mirror system wanted its own grammar. They set up a cloth panel at 800 feet aft, 15 feet wide, with a chalk grid measured in feet and fractions. The tail sat on jack stands. The guns were fired through a safe lane while everyone wore earmuffs that did nothing useful. First, they shot where the books said to shoot. The twin impacts printed a bow tie. Then they nudged the left gun one flat of a nut high, and the right the same amount low, until the bow tie became a lumpy oval. They tuned again by what the mirror box liked to see. Impacts stacking vertically in the same space where the top left hairline met the reticle ring for a high 6 pass. When the dots on the cloth began to overlap inside an area the size of a dinner plate at 800 feet, the armorer said, "Enough." But the tail gunner asked for one more micro-adjustment, the compulsive finishing stroke of a man who understands that a tight group under calm air becomes a merely acceptable group under weather, fear, and time. Chalk marks on the mirror's edge felt silly until combat made them sacred. At altitude, the world turns metallic blue, and range is a liar. A fighter coming up the 6 at 450 mfy looks the same size at 2 distances that only your stopwatch can separate. The hairline ticks gave the gunner something his body could believe. If the canopy filled from tick 2 to tick 3 in less than a breath, it was time for the shorter of his 2 standard bursts. If it took the length of a cough, he had time to find the upper left lead bar notch. He timed it with his own pulse. At first he counted too fast, then too slow. After 10 missions the counting stopped, and the hands remembered. The mirror box failed once, and everyone who had fallen in love with it learned the proper distance between craft and faith. A flak burst close enough to make rivets ring, knocked the frame off square. The next 2 bursts went wide, high left, clean misses with the righteous sound of correct work aimed at the wrong sky. The gunner called it out on interphone. "Box off, reverting to raw sight." The pilot kept the airplane steady long enough for him to tear the frame off and stick it under his pad. He shot the next pass like a normal man. Too long, too late, and hated himself for it in words the waist gunners pretended not to hear. On the ground, the crew put lock wire through the clamp bolts and backed it with safety screws. The tail gunner wrote on his pocket card, "If box goes, don't chase ghosts. Short bursts only. Reset eye to reticle ring, no corners. Losing your tool and losing your temper are first cousins." He learned to keep them from coming to the same party. Combat put the method into stories that people would later quote in bars and get a few details wrong. Over Mersburg, a Focke-Wulf tried the high 6 slash that instructors love to diagram. The mirrors caught the geometry before the body felt the threat. The hairlines made a picture that the gunner had rehearsed 100 times, not a fighter, but a black shape climbing along a diagonal that has only a few solutions. He compressed one lead bar, let the wing root cross the top edge, and gave the short burst that sounded like a stapler with bad intentions. The fighter flinched. Tracers drew a brief zipper near a canopy. A panel popped off like a confession. The waist said, "Splash?" The tail said, "No splash. He's down and away." The pilot said nothing, because pilots who survive long wars learn to spend praise like money. On another day, a 109 came head-on and slashed under, the classic trick that makes tail gunners spill their coffee inside their skulls. The mirror box turned the fastest geometry into a lever he could pull. He planted the lower right hairline on the silver dot where the spinner clawed light, accepted that his reticle would never sit still, and lit a burst that was more refusal than aim. The 109 found space somewhere else. The tail gunner logged the burst as preventive, a word he had never liked for medicine but liked fine for killing. His co-pilot became a convert in his own way. Formation turns ruin tail lanes. The co-pilot kept them predictable in seconds instead of degrees. "Left 3 and 5, steady," he said on the run-in to a target where the flak map looked like acne. The tail gunner said, "Copy, box set." And everyone understood that accuracy is a team sport. The radio man logged dispersion again. The tail's bursts stayed inside a cone that would have embarrassed his first 10 missions. Fewer tracers went wandering into conversations that did not involve them. A waist gunner, who had been a skeptic about anything you couldn't bolt down with 4 fasteners, asked quietly whether he could borrow a mirror and a scrap of plexi to try a small version around his ring sight. The tail gunner helped him make one, not because he thought it would work the same on a swinging gun, but because men who share tools live longer. The system's first principles became the kind of lore that makes sense even when you strip it of romance. Parallax is a liar you can turn into a witness. Fix your eye, and the frame you see becomes a rectangle that behaves the same way often enough for the brain to relax. Fixed peripheral cues reduce overcorrection because hands hate moving targets more than they hate moving airplanes. When the world is framed, you can trade panic for arithmetic. Compress this much lead, hold that much elevation, dare to wait the half-breath that separates a wasteful burst from a useful one. Every gun camera film that came back and showed short, square bursts grew the crew's appetite for discipline. They started arguing only about where to put the next tick marks, not about whether the ticks mattered. That is how systems win, when the human debates shrink from if to how much. They quantified what could be quantified. Median rounds per successful deter, down by 40% over the first 30 days. Time to solution on high 6/, down by 1¼ seconds on average. The gunnery officer, who loved graphs the way some men love songs, drew a tight little curve on a clipboard that showed burst lengths settling into a sane cluster. The intelligence officer, who loved stories more than numbers, pointed out that German interceptors were breaking earlier in their runs against their squadron, throwing fewer shells into the formation from the 6. Cause and effect are lovers who often lie to each other. Here they seemed briefly honest. If the tail scared you earlier, you peeled earlier, and the fortresses lived 1 more minute to drop bombs that were supposed to solve a different problem entirely. The team craft mattered as much as the mirror. Armorers rechecked harmonization after every mission now that someone cared. The radio man kept a drift log and called left-right 2 clicks into the tail at long cruise, little corrections that mattered when wind and daylight conspired. The co-pilot watched sun angles like an astronomer. The pilot learned to skid less without giving flak the straight, holy gift it wanted. The waist gunners stopped the habit of spraying at specs just because they could. Ammunition, which had felt infinite when you were 20, suddenly felt like money from home. Finite, precious, a thing you don't squander because you like how noise feels in your hands. The mirror didn't make them saints. It made them efficient sinners. Not every day belonged to men with boxes. Weather climbs into a fortress like a dog that doesn't like you and never leaves. On those days, the mirror edges condensed with your breath and needed a knuckle wipe that you never had time to give. The kid from Indiana drilled tiny vent holes with a needle to reduce fogging and rubbed the mirror backs with a smear of anti-icing paste stolen from a place it belonged more. Once the mirror cracked in the cold and held anyway because the hairlines were etched shallow. The crack looked like a bad omen and behaved like a harmless vein. Once the clamp snapped, and he shot naked sight for 2 passes, embarrassing anyone who thought magic had replaced method. He wrote another line on the pocket card. Do not make the box your god. It is a brace for a good habit, not a habit itself. He began teaching in the evenings, not because the group ordered it, but because men asked. He showed them the bicycle trick. Mount a loose mirror on a stick, find a corner of a window as your anchor, learn what your eye does when you hold the same frame twice, then shoot a marble with a slingshot through the same space blind. It looked like a carnival trick until 3 men did it in a row and hit the same chipped brick. He talked about mills and wingspans and rule-of-thumb leads, and most of all, about the humility of equipment. Harmonize your guns to your picture, he said, not to the book. Books don't shoot. You do. He showed his pocket card with its nervous little notes and its 2 red dots, one for where his eye lives, one for where it tends to go when fear wants to drive. They took the system to a mission that made headlines. The box worked there too, but nobody wrote that line in the history. Over Berlin, the tale became a church bell. 3 short bursts, then quiet, then 2, then quiet. The formation turned on a schedule that tasted like pennies. Fighters arrived in 3s and left in 4s. After landing, the crew chief touched the mirrors like a man checking a horse after a hard pull and said simply, "Still square," which was the highest praise he gave machines. The gunner wrote in his diary, 2 sentences and no adjectives. Box held, hands held. He slept like he'd unloaded sacks all day and dreamed of nothing. After the war, you could take the mirror frame off the sight, and it looked like hobby. That's how most great field mods look in museums. Some tape, some scratches, an optimism you can't catalog. The kid from Indiana went home with a folder of range logs and a pocket card he would find in a drawer 15 years later and laugh at for being so serious. He did not patent anything because patenting a mirror is like patenting patience. But the idea did not die. Flight test units looking at tail turrets for new bombers wrote memos that read like his notebook about framing, fixed cues, and eye position. Gunners who had learned the box became gunnery instructors who never mentioned mirrors but taught eye discipline like a religion. In a way, the hack's legacy was not glass, but habit. Short bursts, timed leads, harmonized guns, crew-minute coordination, the sound of tracers landing where intention sent them. There were critics in print who argued that no tail gunner ever tripled his accuracy, because accuracy is a word that means too many things. The gunner agreed with them in public and disagreed in private. What I tripled, he told a friend in a letter, was usefulness. I made more of the moments I was given. That sounds like humility, and is also arithmetic. If you get 3 useful bursts where you used to get 1, your practical accuracy has grown, even if the gods of statistics yawn. The friend wrote back and asked for the pocket card. The gunner mailed him a copy and a note. Scratch your own ticks, make them yours. The trick only works when you stop believing it is a trick. The envelope had a little smear of lamp black that never came out of the paper. Years later, A museum doc who loved footnotes more than air ran across a Form 104 with the radio man's tiny drift column and the notation "tail bursts tighter, W pause mirror." He found the gunner, now older and less impressed with some parts of himself, and asked for the story. The gunner told it without adjectives, and then asked if the man wanted coffee. The story is better with coffee. The doc put the mirror frame in a glass case with a card that said, "Field Expedient Tailgun Sight Reference, ETO, 1944. People walked past and thought about shaving mirrors and the smell of alcohol wipes and the way the sky sometimes needs a box to make sense." What remains after the numbers and the nostalgia is a rule of thumb that belongs in more places than a tail turret. If you want to do precise work under stress, give yourself a frame that does not move. Anchor your eye. Put fixed cues at the edges of your job so your hands can be calm even when your heartbeat thinks your hands should be artists. Pre-compute what you can. Lead bars, mill ticks, harmonization offsets, so that your brain does matching instead of inventing. Make the team part of the tool. The man with the wrench who rechecks the bolts, the pilot who gives you seconds, the radio man who logs wind you cannot feel in the draft. Call your bursts to yourself like a prayer with clauses. Align, box, bar, burst, correct. If you fail the same way twice and learn what it teaches. Then stop failing. In the end, the crazy mirror system wasn't crazy. It was the opposite of magic. Magic promises without process. The box delivered process you could explain to a boy with a slingshot and a brick wall. The gunner could never make the airplane stop shaking. He could make his picture stop running away from him. He could make the pipper a polite guest inside a room with square corners, even when the room was bucking and the air was tired of being cut. That is not romance. That is respect. For physics, for seconds, for the fact that a fighter pilot has a mother who will also sleep better if you are good at your job. Tripled accuracy is a headline. What really happened is that the tail of one B-17 and then a few more learned to turn seconds into something other than fear. The tracers that used to light the sky for their own pleasure started to mean something on purpose. The waist heard it. The pilot felt it in how fighters peeled sooner. The armorer saw it in the way his cloth targets looked less like embroidery and more like the period at the end of a sentence. The gunner felt it in his hands. Shorter squeezes, cleaner corrections, fewer lies told by panic. A scrap of plexiglass and 2 mirrors framed not just a sight picture, but a way to work when the sky wants you dead. And that, in the end, is all a good hack has ever promised. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest. The mirror edges became a quiet contract. Hold your eye, box the aspect, apply the bar, fire the short burst, and let discipline, not hope, do the rest.